Hey guys, and welcome to the Celebrity Expert, your number one source for all things television and pop culture. My name's Elijah, and the new season of Game of Thrones is just around the corner. But how did we get to where we are now? Game of Thrones is clearly one of the biggest shows on television, so today we decided to take a look back at Game of Thrones from the beginning to where we are now. Let's get started. Production of Game of Thrones actually started way back over a decade ago, where in late 2008 and early 2009 development on what would be a pitch to HBO for a pilot episode began. After the pilot episode was shown to executives, the show was greenlit for production. However, they did want the first episode to be refilmed and reworked to be at a higher quality, so during this time there were a few cast adjustments before settling into the main cast that we saw in the first season. Season 1 does a really great job at introducing viewers to the world of Westeros and the large ensemble of cast members that this series has. The whole purpose of this series is to have a ton of different moving parts, and Game of Thrones does a really great job early on at establishing that there's a lot of characters to keep track of, but in a way it does a really outstanding job at giving characters relevant moments so that people can pay attention to who everyone is. That first episode kicks off with a bang as things are kind of slow at first, but there's still an impending threat, which is really interesting. But at the end of the episode, the way that episode ends really shows that this show can be absolutely ruthless. Some of the most memorable moments from season 1 definitely include Ned Stark's execution, as that was something that wasn't even seen very commonly in television at the time. I mean, seeing the show's lead character and protagonist getting killed off 9 episodes in was shocking to viewers, but it definitely set the tone as to the fact that anything can happen moving forward. And even bigger, it serves as the major motion that causes all of the events throughout the series to happen. We also have the really awesome scene where Daenerys gives the birth to the dragons, which play a major role throughout the rest of the series, and we also find out that she's fireproof, so that's kind of cool. After the airing of the first episode of Season 1, Season 2 was greenlit for production, and honestly it was clear from the very beginning that the stakes would be higher than ever moving forward with the rest of the series. An interesting note during the production of this time is that they actually had to split the production team up into 2 different teams in different areas for shooting, as one of the major story elements from season 2 forward is the whole clash between the East and West continents. Since these are super high budget series that need to be filmed within a year for release, they definitely had to split it up into 2 different parts, but it actually worked out really well. For a show that no longer had a main protagonist or one character that kind of rooted the whole story in, it still transitioned pretty decently out of this, and there was still a lot to care about in the other characters that were there, and a lot of characters that kind of existed in the background maybe during the first season really got to have larger roles moving forward. Season 2 premiered on April 1st, 2012 and ended on June 3rd, 2012. And some of the major things that we saw in Season 2 were Renly's murder, the Battle of the Blackwater, where Stannis attempts to take King's Landing, but Tyrion actually stops this from happening, and actually shows how brilliant of a character Tyrion is, because his tactics used here were really great. We also see Theon take Winterfell, which causes Bran and Rickon to escape with Hodor. And after Season 2 released, a real cult following really started to get behind Game of Thrones, and a ton of people really started to watch this show. And with the production of Season 3, and Season 3 being probably one of the biggest jumps in having viewership for the show, the stakes were definitely higher than ever, but sure enough, even with the release of Season 3 in 2013, the show was mostly really well received. Season 3 also had one of the craziest things that had happened in this show or in television as a whole since maybe the end of Season 1. But the Red Wedding happened in Season 3, and we all remember how crazy this was at the time, because honestly just so many deaths happened in this single episode, and so many storylines just kind of came to an end. But on the bright side, when these crazy episodes like this happen, it causes so much room for a really exciting story because it just builds up so much more tension, and there's so many more rooms for the plot to really go and feel like the stakes are truly higher than ever, while also fully reminding us that on this show absolutely anything can happen, and that's really interesting. We also see Daenerys overthrow the Masters of Slavers Bay. And while her character has always been doing a lot, this is kind of one of the moments where we realize that she actually has potential to be a major player in the game here, and it's kind of a unique role that we see here. Once again, in the aftermath of what happened with Season 3, Season 4 began filming in 2013 for a release of 2014. And just like what happened in between Seasons 1 and 2, this new season, the people that made it to Season 4, a lot of new characters or old characters were able to kind of emerge again and have more of a role in the story moving forward, especially if they were more of a minor character in the previous season. In Season 4, we also see the introduction of the Red Viper, which was some A+ casting. And as a whole, Season 4 really feels like a turning point in the overall series, almost like maybe the very early beginning of the end, where just a ton of things start falling into place. Some of the highlights are Joffrey dying at his own wedding. And that was just a really rewarding scene because I don't think a lot of people really liked King Joffrey, except it sucks because Tyrion ends up taking the fall for the murder, and he goes for trial by combat and ends up having his champion lose. Rest in peace, Red Viper. But fortunately, Tyrion is still able to escape and murders his father on the way out, so there's that. And with that, in Season 4, we also see the Battle of Castle Black, which really did a great job at kind of showing a lot of Jon Snow's character and also gives him a chance to develop a little bit more. And with Season 4's conclusion, Season 5 and 6 were renewed at the same time, however they would still be filmed separately and a year apart. Season 5 really keeps the ball rolling with a lot of the themes and values that are occurring in this story. However, as a whole, the story does begin to stray a little bit away from the source material from the books, which happens a lot in this series, mostly because they have to kind of pan out how they're going to hire certain actors to do certain things, and if character is introduced early on but doesn't do anything for a while, it doesn't necessarily make the most sense to introduce them and pay for that cast member to be there. So while it does stray a little bit, for the most part, it's still relatively accurate, even here in this point in the series. Season 5 shows us some ridiculously awesome fight scenes, and we really get to see some awesome stuff with the White Walkers finally, as they have always had a role from the beginning, but they kind of always lurked around and we never got to see like a full out epic like this. We also see an interesting assassination attempt against Daenerys, who uses her dragon to escape, which is also awesome. We see Stannis sacrifice his own daughter and then dies, and then his wife commits suicide. It was a hot mess, but he loses his army and his entire army gets killed at Winterfell. It's a pretty big blunder and a pretty big sacrifice, but it's kind of ironic at the same time. And of course, in typical Game of Thrones fashion, a major character is murdered again. This time, Jon Snow is dead. Except not really. Filming for Season 6 would begin in 2015, and the Season 6 would premiere in 2016. However, Season 6 of Game of Thrones was actually the first season to completely have no more source material to go off of. So Season 6 would kind of be charting in a new territory. With that, the budget for this show really rose a lot, with $100 million going into production of this season. But some of the highlights from Season 6 definitely are the fact that Melisandre turns out to be a really, really old woman using a magical gem to stay young. We see Daenerys take control of the Dothraki, which is really cool if you think about her character and everything she had done from the first season forward. And now she's in control of these people. And the way that she maneuvered that to take the power was just really awesome. We see Hodor dies to the White Walkers trying to hold the door, which was clever. And also, the Masters of Slaver's Bay invade Meereen, which essentially serves as a major opportunity for Daenerys to show up with her dragons and claims all of those fleets as her own. And at this point, she's a powerhouse with the military that she's built up at this point. We also see the Battle of the Bastards, which is a huge battle. We also see Cersei completely just obliterate her enemies, resulting in King Tommen later committing suicide. We see Jon Snow become King of the North, and Arya kills Walder Frey. Who knew this kid would grow up to be kind of savage? But hey, she gets her revenge for what happened during the Red Wedding. And finally, while the show has been taking part in different places, Daenerys finally begins to set sail for Westeros, kind of bringing this character that existed in a different side over to where a ton of the other characters are, and the real Game of Thrones begins. And finally, in 2016, filming for season 7 of Game of Thrones began, which was going to be the last season of the show. Well, sort of. What they decided to do was they were going to take the last season and break it up into 2 seasons, making a total of 13 episodes. However, somewhere along the production line, they decided just to keep it at 7 episodes and make it season 7, and 2 years later, sometime later this year, we will see the release of season 8, which will conclude Game of Thrones as a whole. Still, season 7 marks the beginning of the end of this show and the story, and things honestly are getting bigger than ever at this point. Some of the biggest moments that happened in season 7 definitely were Arya getting her revenge on the House of the Freys, another echo to the Red Wedding where she poisoned 51 people, which is crazy. Jon Snow meets Daenerys, and while it doesn't look like they're going to get along too well at first, eventually a pretty strong alliance is formed between them. We see a reunification between the Stark kids, which was something really cool, just kind of a callback to the first season, and shows how far the show has grown and these characters have grown over the last 7 years. We see Daenerys completely wipes out House Tarly. We see the Night King kill one of Daenerys' dragons, and then reanimates it to life to make it his own dragon. That's going to be crazy to see how that plays out in season 8. And just as we think that Jon Snow and Daenerys are starting to rally troops together to fight against the White Walkers, we see that Cersei declares a truce with them and decides to join them in battle, only to later find out that she's actually planning on betraying them in the process. Sansa and Arya also expose Littlefinger and kill him. And finally, we see the Night King breaching the wall, which is going to lead to some chaos coming up in the next season. But that's everything that happened between season 1 through 7, or at least some of the major moments and some production background. This is such a huge series. There's so many moving points, but if you're excited for season 8, be sure to hit the like button down below and leave a comment with who you think is going to come out on top at the end of all of this. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.